Hey folks, welcome back. In today's episode I'm going to be covering this Xiaomi Wemax projector. So if you have seen any of those Xiaomi Mi projectors, and I'm probably butchering the name so I apologize in advance, the Wemax projector is one that came out a little bit more recently. It comes in a black color and it is an ultra short throw projector. It is also a laser projector. Now the differences between this model and the previous model supposedly lie in the fact that the source of the light is now 7,000 lumens as opposed to 5,000. Now I want to answer a couple of questions that I think folks that have been looking into this projector have, and I'm going to do a little bit of an overview and less of a review of the projector since there are already tons of reviews on it out right now. One thing to keep in mind for this laser projector is that the laser is only a single source in this projector, and this is a big deal because that means that the actual output lumens are about 1700 because it has a color wheel. Now, there are also RGB laser projectors out there, which means they have a separate light source for the red, the green, and the blue, and they don't have to use a color wheel, which also means that your output brightness, when compared against this one, is going to be significantly better because they're not having to travel through a color wheel, which obviously kind of depletes some of the luminance that the light source would normally have, because again it's having to pass through an extra material before going into the lenses. But something else that people don't really talk about is the input latency on this. So for those of you that are gamers or are looking to game on this projector, I found that for the most part you can play third-person games that are not shooters or anything that's not necessarily timing specific. You'll be fine on this projector. However, playing FPS, even in single player, can be a really frustrating experience, mainly due to the fact that the quoted milliseconds of lag of input on this projector have been anywhere between 88 milliseconds and about 150 to 180 milliseconds, which is far beyond the range that you want for an FPS or anything that you would play competitively. Now, there is a game mode in this projector, but I don't unfortunately have any numbers on how much of a difference it actually makes. What I can tell you is that the Wemax projector does perform better in game mode than it does in any of the other modes when it comes to input latency, but it's not a huge improvement. So with that said, if you're looking to get this projector for gaming reasons, you may actually want to look somewhere else. Now, one of the things that's also not talked about, this one specifically does come with an English manual, although it doesn't necessarily tell you how to turn the projector on, and there's no buttons on it to really, kind of let you know like what you have to press. So one of the things that is recommended, first of all, is that you actually get, one of these transformers. So the transformer is going to be able to allow you to basically plug it into a US socket and essentially, run it at the proper voltage that it's supposed to be run at. Now, you're not going to necessarily damage the projector by plugging it into 110 volt, but it could malfunction or not work properly. But what I want to bring up is that a lot of reviewers have actually recommended this Simran power, supply or step-up converter, but I actually had an issue with mine where when I got it and I plugged this projector in, nothing happened. So there's actually a little switch at the back of this thing, and I don't think they actually show it on this picture since I've returned it since then. They have a little switch that switches between 110 and 220, and on mine, when I flipped it down to 220, the little light on top of the switch, which is supposed to turn it on and off, was actually not shining. Now, when I put the switch roughly like 3/4 of the way down, the light would turn on, but it still wouldn't let my projector power up. So I actually ended up having to get a different one. So for those of you that are looking at this thing, which is about $24 to $25 on Amazon, you may want to look somewhere else, as it looks like they have some quality control issues. Now, if you want to spend some time and troubleshoot it, it might just be as easy as fixing up some connections on on the inside and maybe soldering them. But I didn't want to deal with it because I wanted to get my projector up and running. So instead, I went to my local hardware store and I just got another step-up converter. I don't know what the brand on this one is. It doesn't really say necessarily, but pretty much anything aside from the Simran should work. Now, something to keep in mind is that for some of these adapters, you may have to get an additional adapter for the projector itself to then plug into, the sockets that are on your step-up converter. Now, in this case, this is one of the plugs that, basically has a Euro socket to a US socket on the other end, and you may need to have yet another converter, which in my case is actually this one. So it's basically going through multiple converters from the stock plug for the projector. Now you may get lucky and you may just be able to plug it in the country that you're in. If you're watching this review, for example, in Europe, you may not necessarily have to go through all the hoops. You may just need one, simple adapter to plug it straight into a socket in your country and it'll work completely fine. But in the States, we do need to have a step-up converter for this guy to get it up and running. Now, once you do plug it into the step-up converter, it pretty much powers up on its own and takes you into the main menu. Now, something else to keep in mind is that this guy only has Chinese menus, so the result is that you actually have to find an English APK, which basically changes some of the options in the launcher to be English. Unfortunately, it does not change everything, and I'll show you guys what I mean by that in a minute when we launch this guy and get it up and running. Now, something else that I have to, also advise you guys on is that if you do end up getting one of those roll-down projector screens, I would strongly suggest that you get one of the ones that have the little ribbing on the side that actually stretches it out, because what's happening on my projector screen right now is that the corners have kind of warped inwards, and the result is that the image basically ends up kind of warping sideways when there's any kind of movement on the screen, and in general the corners look like they're slightly folded, so it looks a little bit strange. Now, you can get around this obviously by just, projecting onto a wall, or, potentially having one of those fixed panel screens that allows you to view this projector normally. Now, I've heard different opinions on what sort of projector screen you need for this. I've heard anything from ALR screens to just the cheapo screens to make sure that it reflects as much light back at you as possible. And, to be perfectly honest, I just have a cheapo Elite Screens, pull-down screen, and it works fine. Could it be better with a better quality screen? Obviously. But if you are on a budget, you can certainly get away with just having a cheapo screen to work with this thing. And actually, a lot of folks, from what I've heard, recommended getting something that's not a gray screen or not a silver screen, but just something white and that reflects as much light back as possible. But it will also depend on the sort of conditions that you're in. Obviously, if you are in a darkened environment, maybe a silver screen might be a better choice. If, however, you end up running the projector a lot during like dusk or daytime hours, something that reflects more light back would probably be more ideal, as that way you're not going to be getting, a sort of washed out image. Something else to keep in mind about this guy is that it only covers about 75% of the NTSC color gamut, and essentially what that means is that the colors, are not going to be as clear as, for example, even on an LCD TV, and certainly not as good as on an OLED. Now, this is made a little bit better by the fact that this projector, is using a laser light source, and it's using a DMD chip from, Texas Instruments, and they use a lot of DOP, projection technology in their offices, and they also obviously provide a lot of these chips to other manufacturers. And, the general consensus is that DOP has better colors than, for example, an LCOS display in certain projectors, and 3LCD, for example. So there are different, kinds of projectors out there, different bulbs that are used. But again, the laser light source helps kind of make things a little bit better on this projector than otherwise would happen. Now, something else too that you want to keep in mind is that you can't actually project 4K content with this particular model. What it will do, however, is it will take 4K content in and it will actually downsample it to 1080p, and it will also downsample HDR to the standard color range that this projector can output. So you can input 4K sources, but you're not going to get 4K content out of it. Now, there are obviously, 3 laser projectors out there that, are significantly better quality, but then you're paying a much higher price for what you get. Now, from what I've heard, Wemax also has a pro version of this projector, which is supposed to have, slightly more advanced optics, better lumen output. But I think that for most people, in the price range that this is in, and considering the, practicality of having an ultra short throw, this makes life a heck of a lot easier for projecting stuff onto the screen. So in the next part of the video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys my setup and my screen, and essentially what it looks like in my room. Right now it's pretty bright out, so you'll kind of see how my, my screen performs. Now everything's going to depend on my GoPro as well. it doesn't handle darkened environments too well. So we'll see how that goes. But in general, I feel like this will serve most of your needs incredibly well. I've been really happy with it in terms of the performance, in terms of how quickly it boots up. Everything's just really quick. So let's get into the actual projection itself and see how well it looks in my room. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on so we'll see roughly how long it takes to power up. I'm going to plug it back in and we'll take a look at that. Minimal light in the room right now. Okay, so you can see it just started going, and then I'll need to adjust this a little bit. And as you can see, there's all the warping that I was talking about in terms of the screen itself. And a lot of the stuff is in Chinese, so that's also that. I'm going to go ahead and connect my PS4 controller so we can kind of take a look at that. But one of the things I wanted to show you guys is if you actually take a look at the remote itself, there is a button which is, kind of looks like a bunch of 3 dotted lines or something like that, and that takes you into a little mini menu here, and you can exit out of that. But something that's more important is actually going into the settings up top and adjusting the display for, the keystone correction. So this will kind of help mitigate some of the warping. So for example, I'm going to move this corner up a little bit so it doesn't look as, as crappy here. And we'll go into that, roughly stretch that out and go back. Take that corner down just a little bit. And there's some fine-tuning that you can do as well, which basically, just makes it a little bit slower in terms of how quickly you are able to adjust the screen. So that's the keystone correction in there. You can go ahead and hit confirm. Obviously you've got a number of projecting modes as well. You can mirror, you can flip, so on, depending on also how it's mounted. If it's ceiling mounted, that you may want to change it there. As far as that's concerned, you also have the option to turn electric focus on or off. I usually just leave mine on, so you've got some additional settings in there. And of course you've got a couple of different options here as far as the video settings that are pretty basic in terms of what you can do. So that's one way of adjusting stuff in there. You can also obviously change things like your Wi-Fi, connection to Bluetooth speakers, and your input source. But for the time being, we're just going to go straight into the PS4 that I have connected. Okay, and again, you can see there's a lot of warping due to the fact that, I have the projector on this screen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push it a little bit closer so we get rid of some of that warp. We'll take a look at Resident Evil in the meantime, I suppose, since I do actually have that game installed currently. There's not a whole lot of colors or room going on. Yeah, this is still like, super early on. Let's see if I don't think I can even do too much here about the general colors of everything. So I might actually get attacked. I don't remember exactly what happens during this section. Oh, yep, there it is. Okay, so we're probably going to get hit by this guy. So there it is. There's the game now. So you can kind of see what the colors look like in general, and it looks okay. It's not fantastic by any means, but for the quality that it is, it's actually quite good. I actually like the way that this looks. Typically, it's a pretty nice looking game. Definitely one of the better lookers on the PlayStation 4. But let's see if the other game has finished downloading. Hopefully we can just kind of kick that off. Alright, so here we are in Infamous Second Son. As you can see, a much brighter game, so you can kind of tell the colors are a lot more vibrant here than they are in Resident Evil, which has, of course, a more muted palette as a result of the post-processing that they do and all the film grain and stuff like that to remove, basically what the game should actually look like. So basically there's some color grading going on. And obviously there is some color grading going on here as well, but you can clearly tell that this is a much more vibrant game, a lot more, light sources happening here than anything else, so it's definitely a lot more beautiful, and certainly it looks a ton better. So as you can see, there it is. Let's see if we can actually, I guess it just makes us watch the cutscene for the time being, but actually this is a pretty good showcase of what the projector is capable of, and as you can see, everything just looks really sharp, everything's in focus that needs to be, all the textures are coming through really clearly, and you can't really see the pixels, even despite the screen being what looks like roughly 90 inches right now. It still looks pretty darn good. It's roughly about 80 or 90 inches currently, and it just looks really crisp. A lot of people talk about having the rainbow effect with this projector, and with any DLP projectors. I personally don't see it very much, but maybe it's hard to tell from this scene because it doesn't have a whole lot of sunlight coming through currently. So again, it's not super obvious as to what's going on here, but I haven't personally seen it in movies or in games when playing on this projector. Even when playing games like Mario, I didn't necessarily see that stuff very much, so it's pretty obvious that there's some cool things, that are happening here that are given a lot of detail in general. Now, I will do some more tests in other games after this, so if you guys want to see any games on this projector, I know this is obviously not the greatest way to kind of show you what the game actually looks like, or what other games look like, because mainly of my projector screen, which is really cheap. But, for the most part, I've been really happy with this. There are some strange bands kind of happening here, and I think that mostly has to do with my screen more than it has to do anything with the actual game itself. So there's obviously that. Now, personally, I think having a better screen does help this projector a lot, and I think that'll definitely be my next purchase, and I'll try and kind of just see what kind of materials make it look a lot better, so I may just ask for a number of different, options for this projector to see what kind of stuff I can get to make it look a lot better. Ultimately, once I do decide on a screen that looks ideal, I will let you guys know so you can kind of see, just how well everything looks. Obviously on this screen, again, it's not going to be the greatest, but for the most part it does okay. There is certainly input lag, but it's not horrible for games like this. It's definitely manageable. Now, you're not going to be knocking out people with instant headshots as soon as you press the button, but it, for the most part, works. And that's really the most important part, which is that, you're able to play the games as you want. I will try my best to do an input latency video later on at some point. Currently, I don't really have a good way of measuring that. Now, there is a company that's supposed to be releasing their own custom version, which you can basically just attach to your computer over USB, and then essentially as you push the buttons, it measures the photon latency. But currently, I think that's just not really feasible, given the fact that they haven't released the product, A, and B, because I just don't have a pretty good screen to really measure against. So that's probably not going to happen. But hopefully, this video shows you what the projector is capable of for the most part, and shows you what the colors are like. Again, everything looks absolutely gorgeous here, just across the board, basically. Everything is, beautiful. All the colors are really well accentuated. I actually think it's really comparable to the Sony Bravia TV that I have. So hopefully there's that. If you guys want to see some more, videos of this projector, if you want to see some more information about it, I'll try and post as many links as I can in the description, as well as make some more videos explaining how this thing works. Basically, a couple more different details about it that I haven't mentioned in this video. So hold on until those videos come out, and I'll see you guys then.